Welcome back to our Mussar study group. I am Batya Gage, and I'm so glad you've joined us today as we work together on strengthening our midot, our character traits. Well, I hope you had a great Shabbat this weekend and are having a really enjoyable Hanukkah. I know we certainly are. We've had so much good food, so much candle lighting, so much fun, and I hope wherever you are that you are too. Last week, we took a little brief look at the original story of Hanukkah and how the Maccabees had victory over the Greeks and they rededicated the temple and they found one little jug of oil which miraculously lasted for 8 days in the menorah in the temple. But this week, I just want us, as we kind of finish out the week of Hanukkah, to look at the story of Hanukkah from a little bit different perspective. It's somewhat ironic that the only place in the scriptures of any kind that you can find any reference to Hanukkah is in the Besorah. In John 10, it says, "At that time, the feast of dedication, which we know as Hanukkah, took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Yeshua was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, 'How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Mashiach, tell us plainly.'" You know, in another place, Matthew 14, Yeshua says, "You are the light of the world. A city located on a hill cannot be hidden." Psalm 119, 105 says, speaking of the Torah, "Your Torah is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." And back to Matthew 5, this time in 16, it says, "Let your light," which we know as the Torah, "shine before people so that they can see your good works, your good deeds, and give honor to your Father in heaven." So as we carry out the mitzvot of the Torah before people, we are the light. We become the Hanukkah. You know, when Yeshua was questioned there at Hanukkah time in the temple, he pointed to his own work, his own deeds, his own miracles in this time of miracles, this season of miracles, as proof that he was the Mashiach. His works, his deeds clearly displayed who he was, just as our deeds should display who we truly are. By now, you probably know or are learning that there's one candle on the, or one light, one lamp on the Hanukkah that is set apart. Either it's in the middle or it's set apart to the side that is used to light the other lamps. And that's called the shamash. And the shamash means servant. And so this light or lamp candle is used to light all of the others. In John 8:12, Yeshua says, "I am the light of the world." He is the light of the world. "He that follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life." He is the shamash. He is the servant candle that lights all the other candles. He is light, so we can be light. And it's only because and by his light that we can gain the victory over the powers of darkness, since the darkness cannot comprehend light. And I would just say that may Hashem grant us in this season of light the ability to behold the glory of his light by abiding in his love. You know, Hanukkah is the feast of dedication, and there's no better time than to rededicate our lives to mitzvot and to serving Hashem, kindling our lights, which is the Torah, new and brighter through mitzvot, and of course, midot. Okay, on to our lessons for today. Our two books that we're studying. Each week we study two midot, and the two books, the Spiritual Practices of Good Actions and the Mussar Torah Commentary, both cover similar midot, but in different orders. So sometimes it seems like we keep circling back over the same midot time and time again, which is interesting because Emet has been talking a lot this week about circles and circling. And he has been teaching that in this time of that we are moving beyond the concept of avengers to the concept of sovavim, the those that circle around the temple, the Torah. And if you haven't had a chance, I would really encourage you to. He's got some new podcasts out there. He's changed the name a little bit to Cool GYS, and that's KHUL, and Get You Some GYS. So make sure that you check those out on whatever media you listen to podcasts on. It's on Spotify or whatever media you use to listen to podcasts. I would encourage you to listen to his new podcasts. So recently, in our Mussar Torah commentary, we studied the mido of truth, of Emet, when we studied the life of Yaakov. And we saw where there was not always truth in that parsha. And we said at that time that what we could really use a big dose of in our current world, especially our country, is a big dose of Emet, a big dose of truth. And, we are here in the United States going through quite a crisis right now of untruth. We are just finished an election in which a lot of people, maybe half of the country, are not confident in the honesty of the elections and the outcome and how it's being shown. So it's quite a problem. And so this is the problem of untruth and dishonesty, fraud and deceit on a large scale. I read a most disturbing article this week on a new technology, and it's not so new, but it's being developed more and more, called deep fake technology, or GAN, I think is the actual technology. And this is a very dangerous technology and very powerful. And what this technology does is it can take, for example, this video of me, and it can put other words and make it look like I am saying words that someone else perhaps has said. And it's almost impossible to detect that it's a fake. And there have been, I read stories about some other smaller countries where this was even used to fake that the leader of that country said something that he didn't say, or appeared when it wasn't him. And this is going to be quite a problem because we depend a lot of times on video to know the truth. But if we can't even trust what we see to be the truth, how are we going to determine the truth? And that's on a big scale. But even on a small scale, truth can be a problem sometimes. If you think about someone asks you to go to a party, maybe you don't like that person too much, or maybe you have another reason you just don't want to go. So rather than tell them the truth, you make up some little white lie about how you have a previous engagement. No big deal, right? Or you really, really, really need the job for which you're interviewing. So you pad your resume just a little bit, hoping they won't really check in too much detail. A lack of honesty is acceptable in our society today and often expected in certain situations. So in our spiritual practices book today, we circle back around once again to the midah of Emet, of truth. Our author states, as he often does, that we all have every trait, some, but in different measures. Even the greatest liar has some grain of the midah of truth within him. And even the most honest person can at times be out of balance with their truth and maybe even be dishonest. Or that most honest person will be so out of balance with their midah of truth that they have completely forgotten loving kindness, and they just speak whatever the truth is in their mind, without any regard for how hurtful it might be to someone. And I think many husbands have probably learned this truth when they were asked by their wives, honey, does this dress make me look fat? Well, if he's going to be completely truthful and answer yes, he knows how much trouble he can get into. But first, we have to figure out or ask the question, what is truth? What is truth? And if you're on our Facebook group, I posted a picture that if you look at an object from one angle, it looks like a square. If you look at the object from a different angle, it looks like a circle. But they're both parts of the truth. And, we know that if 4 people witness an accident, they're going to give 4 completely different accounts, depending on where they were, what they saw, what they remember. It's based on a lot of things. It's often said that if you describe an elephant, if you blindfold people and you have them describe an elephant, it will depend on where they're standing. If they're standing at the trunk, they'll describe it one way. If they're standing near the legs, they'll describe it a different way. If they're holding on to the tail, they'll describe the elephant in a completely different way. But aren't they all the truth? Hashem is really the only one who has the ability to see all of the truth at one time. He's the only one that can really see the elephant all in one picture. He's the only one who can see the future, the past, the present. He's the only one that knows all the secret hidden things. The rest of us, even on our very best days, only have a part of the truth from our perspective. And I think that it would do us well to keep that in mind when we're arguing for and presenting our truth. Our book, The Spiritual Practices of Good Action, gives a story of a single mother, recent law school graduate, getting one of her first jobs at a law firm. And she tells her new boss that she is not able to work on Shabbat because she observes Shabbat. But in reality, she's never observed Shabbat. But she really wants time off of work to be home with her new family. So she thinks that she'll tell this inaccurate statement so that she can get time off. But an interesting thing happens. She begins to observe Shabbat. And our author suggests that perhaps rather than being completely dishonest, she was, without knowing it, speaking truth into the future, speaking the truth of the future. So we've talked a little bit about what truth out of balance looks like. And we know that too little truth, of course, is dishonesty. And we know how damaging too little truth can be to many things, to politics, to government, but also to relationships and to the trust that we have within a relationship. But what does too much truth look like? Recently we pondered the question, would you want to live in a world where there was no trouble? If that meant that you had no free will. So this week, let's ponder a different question. Would you want to live in a world where lying did not exist? We should pause and think about that before we're too quick to answer. They list a movie in the book, which I had not seen, so I went and watched the trailer of it. It's called The Invention of Lying. And in this movie, at the beginning of the movie, lying literally does not exist. It's an alternative world where lying literally does not exist. But it's very interesting because people literally say, you go out on a first date with someone and you just don't find them appealing. The people just say what they think. And it's just a lot of hurtfulness there. So they have no concept of kindness or loving kindness. And so too much truth without any kindness, any loving kindness, any chesed is truth out of balance in the other way. But this midah of truth can be quite complicated, and we could spend more time than we have here today, and we have in the past looked at some very difficult situations with truth. Um, but one of the things that makes it complicated is that truth differs from person to person, just like depending on where you are standing at the elephant. We've also looked at how hurtful being completely honest can be. We've also looked at how dishonesty destroys relationships and destroys trust. We looked at the single mother who was dishonest but spoke truth into the future. So it can be quite a complicated midah to work through. Let's look at a couple of other examples. Hillel, the great teacher, Hillel taught that we should always praise a bride's beauty. But Shammai, there's always Shammai. He's always retorting back to Hillel. And he says, but what if the bride's not beautiful? What if she limps? What if she's blind? Should we still praise her as being beautiful and gracious? Has not the Torah told us, keep your distance from falsehood? Shammai would have our truth be communicated from our perspective. That's how we see the bride. We see because she limps, because she looks this certain way, or she has this, flaw, she's not beautiful to us. But Hillel says, wait a minute. In the eyes of her groom, she is beautiful. And he says, besides, aren't all brides really beautiful on their wedding day? So what Hillel has done is shifted our perspective from our eyes to the eyes of the groom. So he's basically, what we've done there is we've moved from holding onto the tail of the elephant to another part of the elephant. So we're seeing the truth from a different perspective. Let's look at another one. We've studied this one before, and it kind of was a problem for some people. The Talmud in Ketuvot 17a teaches that lying is okay for the sake of shalom, especially for the sake of Beit Shalom, or shalom in the home, or shalom between, people. So perhaps that husband who's been asked by his wife, does this outfit make me look fat? It's okay for him to not completely be honest. After all, Hashem did this very thing. In Bereshit 18, when Sarah hears that they're going to have a baby, what does she say? She laughs, and she says, but Abraham is so old. Now, when Hashem relates this story to Abraham, rather than hurt Abraham or make him feel bad towards Sarah, he's not 100% honest, and he tells Abraham that she laughed because she's old, not because she said Abraham was old. So this adds another layer of complexity to our midah of truth. Alan Moranis in Everyday Holiness says it this way. What standard then is the one for us to adopt? Truth is unreliable and can even be harmful. On the other hand, falsehood is dangerous and is so often damaging. And surely we cannot give ourselves permission to abandon the truth whenever we happen to get stumped for an answer. Such relativism is a slippery slope. So what are we to do? He goes on to say that we should make a commitment to truth, but not be overly rigid about it. We have to use good judgment, not only to see the truth and to see that maybe we don't see the 100% truth, but also to be able to discern how to apply the truth in a particular situation. He says a fusion of truth and chesed, of Emet and chesed. Truth and loving kindness is what is required. And it says in Proverbs 3:3 this very thing. Let not chesed and emet forsake you. So what we need is the two together. Chesed and emet. Loving kindness with truth. Okay, if Emet is your midah, if truth is your midah to work on this week, our book gives you some tips to work on, including a reminder phrase. But I think this Proverbs 3:3 verse is a better reminder phrase, but you can come up with your own and put it somewhere that will help you to remember if this is your midah to work on. Let not chesed and Emet forsake you. To remember, one of the first steps in putting our Mussar into practice each week is to observe. Observe our behavior, observe our feelings, observe our actions. And so take notice of the times when you are dishonest or when you're tempted to be dishonest and ask yourself, what is my motive? Is it because we're just being childish and we're trying to get something we really want? Like a child that says, yes, I've already completed my homework. Can I watch TV? Or is it because we're afraid of the punishment that might come? We lie to get ourselves out of trouble. And record all of these thoughts and observations that you make of yourself in your journal. Then the next step that in Mussar and putting Mussar into practice each week is an action, is putting this into action. And again, it gives some tips. If we are being dishonest for selfish motives, our midah of truth is out of balance. So we can remember in the story of Rahab that she was dishonest, but it wasn't for selfish motives. It was to protect someone else. But if you find yourself being dishonest for purely selfish motives, then your midah of truth is out of balance. And our author gives us some actions to maybe get our midah of truth a little bit more balanced. He says, first, examine your midah of humility. An imbalanced humility, maybe we think it's our job to determine if the other person needs to know the truth or not. And maybe it's not our place. Ask yourself if you're being dishonest because your midah of trust is out of balance. Are you lying to get out of some trouble when really you should be trusting Hashem in this situation? Think about where you're standing in relation to the elephant. Is your truth the only truth? Or is it because of your perspective and where you are in this situation? Can you put yourself in a place where you can see the truth from someone else's eyes, like the groom with the bride that perhaps you don't think is so beautiful? He also suggests strengthen your midah of patience so that you're not tempted to be dishonest to get what you want right now. Another good way is to start a gratitude journal or a gratitude section of your current journal, because the more grateful we are, the less tempted we are to be dishonest to get something we don't have that we think we need. And in your journal, list some ways that you can distance yourself from falsehood. So that should get you a good start this week if your midah is the midah of Emet. Okay, let's now turn to our other book, the Mussar Torah Commentary. This week's Torah portion is Miketz. Now, last week we shifted from the story of Yaakov, and we began the story of Yosef. And we studied Rachem, mercy. And last week we saw this young, immature boy who's tattling on his brothers, who's bragging perhaps about these dreams where they're bowing down to him. And then we see his brothers not responding very well, certainly not responding with mercy, as they throw him into the pit and then ultimately sell him into slavery. Then this week, as the story progresses, we begin to see a more mature Joseph, because a lot has happened to him. He's sold into Potiphar's house. He's falsely accused by his wife, thrown into prison, where he attempts to help the baker and the cupbearer with some dreams that they had. And when the cupbearer is released, he asks him to remember him. And of course, the cupbearer promptly forgets him. So, but during this time that all of these things have happened to him, there's been a transformation in Joseph's life. He has become an immature boy to a mature man with a mature faith in Hashem. No matter what has happened to him, he has had faith in Hashem, that Hashem would take care of him. And in fact, we see evidence of this when he tells the baker and the cupbearer, when he's going to interpret their dreams, he says, interpretations are in God's domain, but go ahead and tell them to me. So he is already beginning to give all of the credit to Hashem. In this week's portion, Miketz begins with another pair of dreams. But this time it's Pharaoh who has a couple of dreams. He calls on his magicians and astrologers to help him understand and interpret these dreams, but they are unable to. So finally, the cupbearer says, oh yeah, there was this guy in prison that was good at interpreting dreams. And he finally remembers Joseph. So Joseph is brought before Pharaoh and asked if he can interpret these dreams. And again, he responds, not I. It is God who will account for Pharaoh's well-being. You remember when we talked about trust versus faith, we talked about the person with faith says, Ein od milvado, only Hashem. Everything Hashem does is for the good. Trust is more of gamzula tova. Whatever he does, it's good. So wherever he is, Joseph just has this firm faith in Hashem and is giving Hashem all the credit. Pharaoh then becomes greatly impressed with this, so much so. And remember, he doesn't know Joseph, really. He's not had much experience with him. He's just really had him brought forth. This is before he interprets the dreams, before he carries out his plan to save Egypt. And yet Pharaoh is very impressed with Joseph. And he says, is there anyone like this to be found? A man with Ruach Elohim Bo, the Spirit of God in him. That's in Bereshit 41:38. So how does he know? What does Pharaoh see in Joseph that makes him say this? Arbonell, a Torah commentary from the 15th century, asks, what does Pharaoh see in Joseph that leads him to say that he possesses the spirit of Hashem, even before the interpretation of the dreams? He said, is it Joseph's repeated mention that everything is according to Hashem's plan and he's merely the messenger? Or is it because Joseph has a plan to save Egypt from this tragedy that's coming up? Netziv, a 19th century commentary, points out that throughout this story, we read that Hashem is with Joseph. He exalts him in the prison. He's protected him. Even though he's had some rough times, he has been with him and protected him. And Joseph has learned to develop and strengthen his faith in Hashem. And because of Joseph's faith in Hashem, Pharaoh trusts in Joseph and elevates him to the chief administrator of Egypt. Now, again, I have come to mind one of my favorite examples of Emunah, of faith, and that's in the story of Daniel 3. Daniel's friends have been placed into a furnace, or they're about to be. And well, let's read a little bit of that. This is in Daniel 3, and they are about to be placed in a furnace because they won't bow down to this statue. And, he says, "Don't you know I can have you killed, Nebuchadnezzar?" And they say, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up." They had faith in Hashem in the most dire of situations. And that's kind of what Joseph has developed during these years in Egypt. In one of the most quoted verses on faith, which is Habakkuk 2:4, it says, in most translations, "The just shall live by faith." But here's our little hashtag Learn Hebrew moment. What it actually says is, "The righteous shall live by faithfulness." Faithfulness is a huge part of Emunah. The righteous lives by steadfast obedience to Hashem and his will, day in, day out. Rabbi David Jaffe describes the midah of faith in Hashem as an individual's trustworthiness, that quality of reliability that we engender in others through sustained honesty and consideration. In other words, Joseph becomes trustworthy as a interpreter in dreams and a viceroy of Egypt because he has put his faith in Hashem. And thus, Pharaoh's remarks, he is endowed with the Spirit of God. There was another person that was described this way, if you remember, and that was Bezalel. Bezalel was the one that was entrusted by Hashem with the building of the Mishkan in the wilderness. Joseph built storehouses. Bezalel built the Mishkan. And both of these men, their Emunah makes them trustworthy, makes them faithful in their obedience. They are faithful servants. And therefore, because of their faithfulness, it allows the creative work of their hands to just flourish. We also learn that faithfulness merits divine reward, both in the Olam Hazeh, the future, and in the Olam Haba, the present. Now, last week we looked a little bit at Hebrews 11 as we were studying Bitachon, trust. We saw in that chapter how Bitachon led to action. We also see from this how Emunah, steadfast faithfulness, is rewarded. Hebrews 11:8, just a little bit of excerpts. By Emunah, faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. A little bit later it says, "These all died in faith, not having received the promise, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them and embraced them." So they did not receive the full reward in the Olam Haba, but they had assurance that they would receive their reward for their faithfulness in the Olam Haba. But what about today? What about the Olam Haba? Is our Emunah rewarded today in our time? Our book says that perhaps it depends on how we understand reward. It also may depend on our motive. What is our motive? What is our goal with our faithfulness? Is it to get material gain and security and safety in this world? And if so, perhaps we won't receive that reward. But if we are being faithful because we want to live a good life, we want to make good choices, we want to serve Hashem, and be the kind of people that would bring glory to Hashem, then definitely we will be rewarded in this life for our faithfulness. Our book says that Emunah, the Hebrew concept of Emunah, of faith, is often confused with the word belief. And certainly, if you search all the occurrences of faith in the Brit Hadashah, you would probably come away thinking that. It's just a thing that I think in my head. Once I believe it in my head, then that's really all it is. But our book says that faith is not something to be understood intellectually or rationally. Rather, it needs to be learned from experience. From as Joseph went along and he had experience with Hashem, his Emunah grew. So Emunah is a mido like all the others that has to be developed, strengthened, and practiced. And the way we do this is that every moment we make a choice. We are making a choice between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, and by choosing the good inclination in faith, we can make those choices in light of the question, how is the divine, how is Hashem being manifest in me, through me, with me in this moment? And by answering that question well, then we can develop our faith in Hashem and our faithfulness, our steadfastness. Okay, our book, the Mussar Torah Commentary, gives us some questions to ponder as we begin to put, if this is your midah for the week, Emunah is your midah for the week. They give you some questions to help you begin to think about it and see how to put it in practice, how to journal. And they bring up a story that we studied in depth previously, and that is a story from the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud in Shabbat 31a. And it connects Emunah to Seder Zeramim. And this is the Mishnaic order dealing with seeds or agriculture. And if you remember, we studied how the farmer, he plants this little dead-looking thing in the ground, but he must have faith that Hashem will send the rain, that Hashem will sprout this seed, that the seed will grow into a plant, and the plant will produce fruit. Yes, the farmer has to have faith to plant that seed, but he can't really do anything about the outcome. And Rashi explains that for the farmer, faith in Hashem is a prerequisite to planting. And I would suggest that sometimes, we plant and then we develop the faith. Sometimes we have the faith and then we plant. But the question is, what seeds do you need to plant yourself in order to cultivate your Emunah? They also ask, how does your experiences with Hashem help you to shape your choices every day between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov so that you can develop your faithfulness? The next question is, what happens when you stop and ask yourself, where is Hashem for me in this moment? How does asking the question shape your understanding and experiences of what may happen? Some really good questions to help you get started on your journaling if this is your midah for the week. The next question is, what are some times in your life when you have felt that faith, Emunah, has helped you to overcome an obstacle or to cope with a challenge? I'm sure that's an area where most of us could have many stories. Then, to put it into practice, when you find yourself in a challenging situation, stop before you act and ask, how can I respond in this moment with trustworthiness, with faithfulness, with dependability and integrity towards Hashem? Okay, well, that is our lesson for this week. And whether you are working on Emunah or Emet or another midah, the first thing you always do is observe yourself. Where am I now? Take a little inventory. How am I doing? Observe your actions, observe your thoughts, your emotions towards the midah. Journal what you learn, and then begin to take specific actions throughout the week to, to make positive changes towards strengthening that midah. So we learned in our spiritual practices this week that Emet is quite a complex trait. We learned that we should make a commitment to truth, but without being overly rigid. We must use good judgment to see that perhaps we don't have the whole truth and to discern how to apply the truth we have in any given situation. And we learned that it takes a fusion of the midah of truth with the midah of chesed, loving kindness, to really put into practice. Or you could get your midah out of balance and be cruel. And we learned in Proverbs 3:3 this very thing, which says, "Let not chesed and emet forsake you." In the Mussar Torah commentary, as we studied Joseph's life, we learned that every choice we make every day is a chance to strengthen our emunah, our faith. Emunah is making those choices in light of the question, how is Hashem being manifest in me, through me, with me in this moment? Okay, well, I thank you for joining us this week as we're studying these two midah and whatever one you're working on this week. I hope the rest of your Hanukkah is just filled with light and miracles and all good, lots of good food. If you think about it, or think of someone that might could, enjoy joining us in our studies, share this video with them. But most importantly is for you to come back here next Tuesday as we study a couple of more midah and try to put those into practice in our lives. So I hope you will return next week. Thank you for being with us here today, and have a great week.